You're watching LTV, Comcast 34 and FIOS 26, Livingston.
Good day, Livingston, and welcome to this edition of Clergy Corner. Joining me on the show today, we have Dr. Richard Vossler from the Grace Lutheran Church. We have Reverend Susan Gillespie from Trinity Covenant Church, and we have Monsignor Thomas Neidinger from St. Philomena's Roman Catholic Church. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Dan.
Arizona lawmakers passed a bill that allows businesses in that state to deny service to lesbian and gay, bisexual, and transgender customers on religious grounds. The bill was vetoed by the governor, Jan Brewer. As states and federal courts have slowly expanded gay rights, groups pushing for increased religious freedom and protections have tried to coax momentum with the other direction, lawsuits and making laws that would prohibit service that would basically maybe deny certain services to particular groups of people. To deal with this topic, and it really is a big topic, and as we take this, we have people that are in Beverly Hills, California, led by Jay Leno. They are boycotting a hotel, and one of the owners, the Saudi Arabia people, they said that if you were homosexual, you would be stoned. So they're saying, how can we really, out of good conscience sake, go and do business with this hotel in Beverly Hills? So it's an ever increasing issue. People are taking, out of conscience sake, homage to this, and they're saying, what's going on? And that really is my question. This is 2014, isn't it? What is happening with society? And so to deal with, the first question is, and Sue, I'll direct the question to you, is what is the major issue here? And why is it coming up at this particular time, you think?
Well, I think you have the collision between rights and where people are coming from in terms of their religious convictions. And when people are arguing on such basic items, you're going to have very, very heartfelt arguments. People who believe that human rights includes freedom to be married in a same-sex marriage are running up against people who truly believe that God has told them that that is something we must not do. Mm-hmm. And those things are so deeply held by each set of people, it's inevitable you're going to have very difficult collisions.
Yeah, there's a lot of pain.
I think it's important also to note that this legislation, which was passed in Arizona and vetoed by the governor, is also up in other states for consideration, I believe, or has been. I can't say
Kansas,
Kansas,
other forms.
Yeah,
of
I know that
legislation,
Kansas was doing it, but it didn't pass their
pending legislation
Senate.
in other areas. And I think the Supreme Court has addressed the issue or will address the issue.
It's actually a separate issue.
Separate issue that
I think,
okay.
Because that's talking about forcing companies to do other kinds of things.
I see. Okay.
But so I guess specifically, you're talking about whether or not businesses have the right to discriminate on the basis of the owner's religious beliefs. Is that what we're talking about?
That probably could be part of the conversation. There are many layers of this conversation. There are many facets of this conversation and really this issue. For me, it's like a slippery slope. Is equality. If you have someone that comes into your store and you want to deny them service, I think that's a business owner's right. But if you say the reason why I'm denying you business is because I don't like the way you look, because of my religious beliefs, then I think that's a little bit wrong too. Or I don't think that's a little bit wrong, I think that's wrong. Yeah. If you have someone that comes in and you're a black and white couple, you're an interracial couple, you know, can you go ahead and deny them business? And also, can you, as a Muslim owner, I think this would really backlash in just in so many ways, and there would be such a slippery slope. If one state did this, maybe then another state would do this, is that if I'm a Muslim business owner, you being a Christian, and you being a woman Christian, I'm not going to serve you because my faith tells me that you're an infidel, and I'm not going to serve infidels.
Okay.
Rick.
Yeah, that's going to what you're saying. That is already happening, and it is happening in New York City. There was a gym that was owned by someone. I don't remember who owned it.
Oh, okay.
But then it was taken over. Well, it was sold to an Orthodox Jewish person, and his understanding was that women and men should not be seen together. You know, so he changed the scheduling so that they would not be together. Now, if you as a man were planning on coming at certain times, now he has changed that, and you can't come at that time. You know, what can you do? There's a whole uproar about your, you know, 'cause it's a 1-year membership and the like. The question then became, well, was he illegal in doing that? And legislation, or the, I don't remember whether it came up to court, because this was like several years ago, it's like 10 years ago or something like that. But he was allowed to keep it and allowed to keep the rules that he had put in, but he had to allow folks who didn't like that law, didn't like his scheduling, to opt out without having to pay the penalty. And that all then goes down into the area of the marketplace. If he's got a marketplace and he's trying to sell his goods, sell the membership into his gym, but he's got it so restrictive, and then the guy over here has the same gym, good stuff, but isn't as restrictive, then more people may flock to him than will flock to this person. Or those that agree will flock to this person.
Well, I think, you know, we've decided as a nation some time ago that we weren't going to allow the market to determine who could be discriminated against coming into a place of public accommodation on the basis of race, gender, you know, religion, all those kinds of things, because we have a long history of, black people not being able to be served in the South, and baseball teams, you know, traveling and their black players not being able to be eaten in the same restaurant, that kind of thing. And we laugh at that and say, I can't believe it was ever like that. I can't believe that we would even think to resurrect such things, and to resurrect them in the name of faith is an even more horrible concept.
We always like to try to sugarcoat, or we try to, you know, put the package of religion on that, because I know that in our tradition, when we had this, the days of the slavery, there were people that were saying the Bible says that the Bible supports slavery. You got the abolitionists, you got the northern folks that said no, the Bible really does not support slavery. The Bible supports equality. So you had both entities right there, and they're using the both scriptures. So it doesn't surprise me that people want to sugarcoat it and say God said.
You know, I think our discussion so far has demonstrated, as you said, Dan, the complexity and the many layers that are involved here.
Yes.
And sometimes it might be helpful to be a little bit more, you know, try to in a complex discussion to have a little more clarity. And I think, you know, Sue, when you started talking, you were really talking about competing rights. What happens when you have competing rights? The rights of whether they're religious rights or religious freedom, or you know, what happens when they clash, when they hit, and that's what's happening, I think, as you were saying, they're clashing, and so who chooses, or how do you choose, or how do you go about choosing whose rights are defended and preserved and whose are not? Because in either way, one's going to fall out, or one's going to, unless there's some kind of a compromise. And so the question of how do you do that I think, is where the complexity comes in, because now what
Right.
criteria do you use to say whose rights are more important than others? The member of a business who in authenticity believes they're acting on their religious convictions to not, or the rights of people to be treated legally, equally, and so what happens when that happens, and what criteria do you use? And I guess for each of us, because I look at these two issues and these two things, and I could see, for example, my faith tradition, the Catholic Church, we could find advocacy on both sides of that equation. For that, and that's why that's where the complexity comes.
Yeah, and it is a complex issue because we're dealing with people. Yeah, and we're dealing with people who feel like their rights are being taken away, and we're dealing with people who feel like their rights are being taken away.
Yeah.
So where do we go ahead?
How do we
and stand?
get that? Yeah.
And I have a hard time legislating people's rights anyway, and unfortunately, we have to do that in our society.
Yeah.
If we didn't do that, we would still have the days of the 50s when we would have the Jim Crow laws, and we would have segregation, and instead integration. But it's sad that the voice of faith doesn't come through, and the love that we preach and that we live by, it doesn't come through.
See, I think
Maybe I'm being idealistic.
this is where the problem lies, is we tend to baptize the things that we have strong feelings about with our faith, rather than letting our faith determine what we should have strong feelings about. Because it seems to me that if it comes down to a collision of rights, that Jesus told us that when that happens, we're supposed to turn the other cheek and walk the extra mile and love our neighbor and love our enemy. And yet, we're out there saying, no, we need to have our rights instead. So even if we think the other people are wrong, I'm not sure that it is up to us to demand that the government uphold our rights.
Jesus also, he said, as you said, turn the other cheek, but he also did not sugarcoat sin.
No.
Okay.
But you have more authority to call sin when you are living in the center of what Jesus said than if you've asked the government to shore up your rights. Then you sort of lose the opportunity to start calling things sin.
Yeah, I think part of it, we started to talk about the Arizona law, and you were comparing it to the other different laws. I think part of the problem was, we talked about before the taping, was, have you read the Arizona law? You have to, we can't talk about the Arizona law unless you've read the Arizona law. And I think that was part of the problem with its defeat, was that there was a lot of smoke going on, a lot of heat, but not many people were actually reading the Arizona law. I'm not saying it was good. I'm saying that there were some things in it that should have been changed, definitely. But there's more talk, more stuff being written about the Arizona law than there was looking at the Arizona law itself and saying, oh, this is what it says. Because there's more to it than what we're talking about.
Well, I think you said that it's only 2 pages long.
It's only 2 pages long.
And,
right.
And the changes on it are even less. The changes could probably be put into about like 2 paragraphs worth.
Yeah.
But
What my problem was, and saddened, was that the governor of Arizona waited until she got back to the state without saying right away she was going to veto this. She had to look at it. And it wasn't morally out of morals, it was out of businesses saying, if you sign this, this becomes law, we're pulling our business totally out of Arizona.
exactly, because they were looking at the caricature rather than looking at the
But don't
law.
we do that anyway?
Yeah,
A lot of
it was
times
kind of
we look at-
interesting.
Yeah, a lot of times when we see a law that raises any types of discrimination towards a particular group of people, we tend to say, no, we're not going to abide by that, or we're not going to support that, or we're going to work against that?
Yeah, we do tend to say that we're going, if it allows discrimination against us, if it has discrimination against people that I agree with, that's wrong.
But
if
wasn't
it's
this
discrimination against someone else, oh, that's okay.
Right. But wasn't this a discrimination against a particular group of people? From the even 2 pages,
It was
said business owners, people don't have to, if it's because your religious background or religious values, you don't have to serve someone.
No.
So if I
no,
was-
No, it did not. It said that you have, if you are, where it talks about person, that people have religious freedom. Religious freedom includes a person and a religious institution. That's already in the Arizona law. That's already in Arizona legislation.
So-
That's fine.
So why did
But
they
then-
want to go ahead in some of your readings that you've done,
Sure.
Rick, why did they go ahead and try to push for this legislation then?
They
If
tried-
that was already in their law?
Correct. They tried to push for this legislation because of what had happened in a neighboring state in New Mexico, where a gay couple wanted to hire a photographer to come and photograph their wedding. The photographer, on religious grounds, said, no, that goes against my religion. I can't do that. So the couple, instead of going and finding another photographer, they decided that they were going to sue the first photographer to get him out of business. And that was their goal, was to get him out of business. And they succeeded in getting him out of business. The folks in Arizona said, no, we wanted to protect businesses from that type of lawsuit. And we're saying, no, we're not we don't want that. And it was interesting to note that after the Governor Brewer vetoed this, it was like within a couple of days, the governor of New Mexico went to her normal hairdresser to get her hair done, and the hairdresser there said, because you do not support gay rights, I will not do your hair, and kicked her out. But there was no uproar against that. There was no uproar against that person for that type of discrimination. That's allowed. But if it goes the other way, that's not allowed.
Yeah. It's a tough issue because I think when legislation, smacks of discrimination on any grounds, that's wrong.
When it's legislation, or even at that, sometimes if there's legislation, then at least there is discussion. There's point and counterpoint and the like, as long as you read the legislation. That's the important thing, and not take a caricature of the legislation. Having said that, some of the problems come about when it doesn't come through legislation, but it comes through the judicial system, where there isn't the discussion. It deals with just the one particular judge or the 3-judge panel or something like that, and whoever has, we've given them the authority to say, well, the will of the people we can ignore. It's just our decision.
It seems to me that, when you are dealing on the level of constitutional rights, it starts to privilege certain arguments. And that's why we have to be very careful about making those arguments on a freedom of religion level. Because it opens the door then to all manner of other kinds of discrimination that could be justified on a freedom of religion level, which would undo, Civil Rights Act and all kinds of other legislation that's already been done, and might be undone by activist judges who thereby say, this legislation therefore means now we're going that way, because constitutional rights tend to trump so many other things. So I think we have to be pretty careful writing up laws to solve a particular situation that assert a constitutional right to it because of where it might go. But I'm not a lawyer or a legislator. Coming from where I'm coming from, I'm wondering why religious people, or at least Christian people, would argue for those things when I don't think that's what Jesus would have done. Regardless of what Jesus would have said about what anyone is doing sexually, Jesus had dinner with a lot of people whose behavior he didn't approve of. So I'm not sure that it would have been such Jesus-like behavior to go out of one's way to say, no, I won't photograph your wedding, for example. So I'm not sure, if that person were in my congregation, I would have said, I'm not sure I can support you're making that as a religious argument. You would make it on some other level, freedom of speech or your freedom to do whatever you want in your business, but on a religion level, I can't necessarily support that.
I think what I'm seeing here at work is that as complex as the issue is, and we've stated that, and we've gotten it. We've delved into that. We've delved into the murky waters that we can, and I think it's part of the beauty and the challenge of the democracy that we live in, because you do got to talk about these issues at these levels, and you bring it down to the thing, because they have a lot of whenever you bring anything into a discussion like this. You also have many different levels. One of them is for example, the political level. There's a political level. So, at this particular juncture in our society's history, gay rights has had some major quote unquote victories over the last couple of months. And others would argue that religious freedom has taken a hit. And how that comes into play in the discussion. That makes it challenging. It makes it challenging. And certainly for us as individual people, we have to bring it down to our own. But it fosters that discussion that goes on that can become very, very convoluted. And you need to have clarity in the way you're thinking. And I think, so you brought it down to that clarity with, bring it back to our faith and do faith institutions have a right to? Absolutely they do. I think they should be involved with legislation. Why not? Why shouldn't they have an ability to speak and speak to it? As Rick, you pointed out, there's they're able to have a dialogue and a discussion about that.
Yeah, a lot of people think, well, why is the church or why the synagogues or why faith communities are getting involved in politics anyway? We should be silent. We shouldn't, talk about this. But I feel that we have a prime opportunity for discussion. We have a prime opportunity to agree to disagree, to wrestle around with these ideas and let the Spirit of God come through.
Well, particularly if corporations are going to be people, I think, religious institutions ought to be able to speak up too.
We're dealing with people. We're dealing with people.
Yeah.
On both sides of the aisle, we're dealing with people. And we're dealing with people's feelings and people's beliefs, and we really need to hear it out. And that's where I have a problem with legislating everything. I think what we need to do is sit people down and share with one another and get people to know one another without getting their back up. And I'm kind of wondering if the same talk was from the religious community, the religious people that said in the 60s, our religious rights are being violated because they're taking prayer out of school. The other one is our religious rights are being violated because integration? You mean we're going to not have the Jim Crow laws anymore? So, it goes on the same thing. It's the same argument, I think, that religious people can bring up all the time. And it's sad thing is that we bring these arguments up instead of pulling back and saying, well, let's talk about them. Where are we, as a people? Where are you as a person and dealing with it? Instead of going to a lawsuit right away. We're a very litigious community, a very litigious society. And it seems like we always have to be very careful about what we say.
That's because that's what seems to get things done, unfortunately, is the lawsuit.
Maybe
The threat, even for that, the threat of the lawsuit seems to be what gets things done, rather than sitting down and talking.
Yeah, because I know that you and I are on different sides of the fence, but we're sitting down and we're talking,
Right.
and we respect each other, and I think that's really where it starts, is communicating and sharing, instead of saying, Rick, I'm going to take you to court.
Yeah, and that's why I'm trying to say, with the legislation, there were some other things in that legislation that it tried to address, but they got swept under the rug by the caricature of it.
And the emotions too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I think
absolutely.
This is a very emotional issue. No matter which way you look at it, it's a very emotional issue.
Well, I think you're right that outrage is a tool in the toolbox of persuasion these days, and whoever can master public outrage is going to get a lot farther. So both sides were complicit in that, of that particular conversation. And you even see that in the Bible. I mean, a certain amount of mastering outrage for certain effects. So we need to be wise and that, I guess, and know what it is. You know.
But I think also, Dan, the point you made about this dialogue being instructive and constructive in terms of helping us as individuals and as communities of faith to really, really look at these competing rights and these competing interests and say, okay, well, where is the heart and the soul of our faith? Where is the heart and the soul of the Lord Jesus Christ? He didn't have to confront this reality in his time, but where would he stand? And it gives us a chance to really, really evaluate, because ultimately what they're looking for is us to say to them, well, guide us. And I have to be honest with you, I've heard people, say things that horrify me about different realities, that they would actually believe what they believe and call themselves Christians. And that becomes, and not related to this issue. I'm not talking about a separate, but
issues,
it really helps us crystallize in our own minds and in our own communities, what do we believe in? What do we stand for?
And I think Jesus did confront a lot of issues in his day that we deal with, because the human story is a human story. Both sides of the testaments. The heroes of the faith had to deal with a lot of issues and complexities that they were dealing with, and we're dealing with this complexity. 10 years from now, 20 years from now, we're going to be dealing with another complexity. We're still dealing with racism, and it seems like racism is rearing its ugly head, and discrimination. So I think, in a sense, any legislation that smacks of discrimination, because of what's going on in our society now, people are very tender and very sensitive to it smacks of discrimination. Regardless of what the legislation is, if it smacks of discrimination, then we're going to have problems.
Yeah, if it smacks of discrimination for my particular group.
Yes. Yeah, it's a very, very tough issue that I think we as clergy and leaders in our faith communities maybe can provide the catalyst for conversation, the questions, the reflection, help the people to reflect. Because I think, as gay rights are becoming more and more prominent in our society, and a lot more states are going towards same-sex marriage, how's that going to affect a lot of different people? People need to have room, a safe room, so they can discuss these things on both sides of the fence. What do they believe or what they don't believe, what they agree with, what they don't agree with, and for them to feel okay with it, with their feelings.
Yeah, and if they are using legislation, or if they are using legislation, that it has to be narrow, so it's going to actually address that situation. I mean, this particular legislation, there was more to it that needed to be addressed, but it got caught up in the caricature of the legislation and was ignored.
And I think there'll be a lot more legislation, as we've seen, and I think there'll be a lot more talking. And thank you very much for being on the panel today and talking about this, because we here in Livingston and here on Clergy Corner, we do talk about some really tough issues. This was a tough issue. This was a complex issue, and we didn't decide anything today. The package is not wrapped neatly. It is messy. It's a messy issue. Why is it messy? Because we're dealing with people, and we're dealing with emotions, and this is a very emotional issue. And I think for us to let our people know that we are okay with talking about it and listening about it and wrestling with our folks, that's a great thing. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, Dan.
And thank you so much for being with us and joining us at your home. Until we meet again, may God's love be with you.